Okay, thank you, Councilmember Che, and good afternoon, Director and staff and everyone who's still here. I wanted to focus my questions on the circulator, and first of all, thank you for being here, and I wanted to, as you were here earlier, point out that the circulator was not your responsibility. You've inherited it, but it was not your responsibility having put it in place in the somewhat convoluted system we have that's running it. So between asking questions and being back here again, I've done a significant amount of research trying again to figure out what's going on here. And it appears from the Metro budget that the district budget to Metro, we make a payment to Metro that comprises somewhere in the vicinity of $368 million. And when I tried to break that number down, indeed, $26.1 million of that $368 million is for the circulator. So we are paying Metro $26.1 million. Now I assume Metro is contracting with, what's the name of the company? Whatever the name of it, Rapid Transit or some company. What is it? First Transit. And taking the $26.1 million and paying it to First Transit to run the circulator. I'm guessing that, but that would be my sense because I haven't gotten from Metro yet what they're doing with the $26.1 million once they get it. One breakdown I need from you then is what comprises the how do you get the, why is the city paying $26.1 million to Metro? Where does that number come from? My guess it is broken down into personnel, into maintenance, and who knows? But if you could get for me that. I've asked our CFO, he's working diligently trying to find that, but he just has the gross number, not the details behind the gross number. Unless you know something about that now, is there anything you can shed on that?
No, I mean, that's a great question. One of the issues with this contract has been that historically the DDOT team has taken I would say kind of a hands-off approach to interacting with WMATA and by extension the contractor and their workforce. And some of the things that seem perfectly reasonable in terms of transparency aren't fully available to us because of the way this structure was set up and the way the contracts were led in the past, and we're in the process of making some improvements to that.
Okay.
So I think that we can pull some information together, but one of the limitations of how I believe this contract was let is that the kind of detailed breakdown of overhead, profit, personnel costs, equipment, and other services is not part of the billing. There's kind of an all-in rate, and that makes it very difficult for us as funders to understand the economics of the deal, and also complicated from the labor union's perspective to understand the wage and benefit principles of fairness and competition. So we're, as I said, the performance oversight hearing, pretty well aligned with the interests of the ATU. It's not that we're oppositional. We'd like to know more, just as they would like to know more. It's been an ongoing process to try to kind of change some of the status quo arrangements that we inherited.
Yep. Okay. So in the proverbial, there's a new sheriff in town. So I wear many hats. So now I can, with my Metro chairman of the board hat, demand from Metro the details, and now from the city side. So again, there's the cost of the district pays Metro $368 million. That's the request this year, of which $323 million is the subsidy. 18.6 is the school transit. 800 million is the for the senior reduced fare, and 26.1 million is circulator. Now, of that, we get, or the circulator revenue number is $3.9 million. So it appears the circulator generates revenue of $3.9 million. I don't know where the revenue goes, whether we get it or Metro gets it or the company gets it. And the district pays $26.1 million to Metro. And so, Leif, if you just check, do you just get a bill for $26.1 and then give them a check, or is there a better breakdown? The contract that would explain the details, does DDOT have it, or does only Metro have it, and Metro and this other company have it, or does just the company have it and Metro doesn't even have it? So those are the things I'm going to explore with my Metro hat on, is who has the contract and what does it say? And what are the breakdowns here? And then it goes back to the testimony you heard earlier. In order to get a wage increase, does the city have to increase the 26.1 to 29.1 to get it to Metro to then pay the employees? And how much of that is involved with maintenance? You know, you heard the testimony of the union, well, they're not maintaining anything because they don't have enough money to maintain it. So is that true? Or, and then you mentioned one I hadn't even thought of, profit. I bet they have profit put in here. What percentage of this money is actually profit? So, and is the fare box collection looks pretty low, 3.9 million, but we only do charge $1. So that's great, and we want to keep it at that. So how do we keep it at that? But anyway, yeah, you look like you have something you might want to add here.
Well, I appreciate your concern about this issue. We're obviously concerned about, because it's a service that we fund, we provide, and we take responsibility for. The party agreements are, kind of a complex component of this whole thing. There's a collective bargaining agreement that's between the ATU and First Transit.
Yep.
There's a revenue and service agreement that's between First Transit and WMATA, and then there's an MOU between WMATA and DDOT.
Okay.
And so those are the essentially the contracts that govern how this works.
Okay.
Our view has been that historically the service has really been impaired by the inability to identify a maintenance facility that can support the fleet that we have for Circulator, which has grown to 67 vehicles. We really should have a facility that has adequate storage, possibly cover of the vehicles, and 6 maintenance bays. We have a facility not owned by the District of Columbia that only has 3 maintenance bays. So we're at a disadvantage from the very beginning. And the fact that we don't have a publicly owned maintenance facility means that when this contract has been let by WMATA in the past, they have difficulty creating competition, because very few of the service providers can come with real estate that has the maintenance facilities available. In fact, the last round of competition only yielded 1 proposal from First Transit. So while WMATA administers that contract, it didn't benefit from, competitive pressure. And so some of the performance standards, maybe the compensation, some of the expectations about training and things like that, I think would have been improved if we had seen more than 1 proposal.
Yeah.
And so there is an effort underway right now with WMATA and DDOT to identify a facility that we could jointly use for Metro Bus and also Circulator. I think at that point in time, regardless of who the actual contract administrator is, whether it's DDOT or WMATA, we'll be in a much better position, because we'll be able to get a better proposal, and then therefore better service going forward.
Yeah.
I came in with a lot of concerns about Circulator, because I heard from customers. I ride the Circulator almost every day. I talk to the operators on their routes on my way to work. I talked to them and asked them about what's going on. I'd heard from the business community about the Circulator and the drop in service reliability. And there had been, I think, a kind of blissful ignorance about Circulator for some time, that it was just this great, wonderful thing, and that we just needed to expand it and expand it. It was as good as apple pie. Well, you know, we were eating a lot of pie and we weren't losing any weight, you know, so we needed to work out a little bit more here. And that's why I commissioned this independent audit. I didn't have to do that. I could have just, you know, ignored all this stuff. I got an audit in there. We identified some concerns. Those concerns, many of them have been remedied. 80% of the defect rate that we identified in that first report, that's been dropped. We've got more mechanics working there. We've opened up another maintenance bay. We're doing better pre-check reports, but I completely agree that we have to do more. I've met with the labor union. I've told them if they give me ideas, I'll incorporate that into how I have my conversations with WMATA. I'm not trying to exclude anybody or to hide from some of the things that need to be done in terms of improving the maintenance and ultimately the safety and reliability that the customers should enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Do you I'm totally out of time here, but do you think that you guys should run this and without WMATA in there, or do you think WMATA still remains to be in there? Are you capable of doing this?
We're taking a good hard look at that.
Good.
I know that this system was set up with this structure 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe that worked in the early stages of the service. I know that historically DDOT hasn't had the in-house capability to manage these complex transit systems and operations. We certainly didn't have that in-house capability with streetcar. We've had to build that. I'm trying to build more of that with Circulator. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to whether or not we've got the right people in charge of this. I've talked to Paul Wiedefield about it. There's in their work to address some of these issues since the fall, I would attribute to Paul's leadership and the fact that he and I have worked together in the past. So how this works out in the future, I think we need to analyze that. But at the end of the day, we have to have competent transit professionals overseeing this operation. We need to improve the employee retention, the credentials of the employees, to the extent that financial incentives in both of those categories can be incorporated into our operation going forward. I've told the union I'm totally open to that. I certainly don't want to be a place that's just a training ground for Metro or Ride-On or the bus or something like that. We want to have good, loyal operators who are happy and safe doing what they're doing, because that just means our customers are going to get a high quality of service.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Great for those comments, because I don't want the Circulator to end up being Metro. You know, that we ignore it, we pretend it's going to be okay, we, you know, close our eyes and think, yeah, all's fine and dandy, and then all of a sudden the thing blows up on us. So this is a real opportunity for us to take a look at this and try and get it right. So thank you, Director.
Thank you, Councilmember. To stay with that, although, believe it or not, I have one last question about trees, but to stay with the Circulator, my understanding was that in August last year, when you commissioned this audit of the Van Hool buses, 49 of them, I thought that was with the aim of seeing whether they could remain in service or what might have to be done to them to remain in service. And it wasn't just a general kind of, now you got religion and you're going to start paying attention to oversight of Circulator. Wasn't that the objective, to see what their condition was, what we might have to do to keep them in service, how long of a life they still had, so that we can plan, you know, on new buses? Wasn't that what was it?
Yes, you're exactly right.
Okay,
the intent was to make sure that we weren't prematurely replacing the vehicles and leaving some value in them.
I want to get somewhere with this, though. So that was about that. But then it turns out that the inspection showed that all of the buses that were dirty inside, in and out, and there were an exceptionally high number of these A defects, which were defects that are serious safety defects that should render a bus out of service until it's repaired. safety equipment, accessibility features, air system, brake system, tires, driver's controls. And of the 42 buses inspected, 40 of them had at least one of these A defects, leaving only 2 of those buses on the property at the time of the inspection that were actually fit for operation. Okay. Now, I know you're saying what happened since, so we're going to get to that. But I want to know why DDOT didn't adequately monitor the fleet, the condition, the performance, et cetera, to ensure that First Transit was abiding by its contract until this time when you wanted to see how long these buses could remain in service. We weren't really, exercising oversight over cleanliness or safety or anything like that until this audit in 15. Is that right?
As I testified earlier, there was a kind of a hands-off approach to WMATA's administration of the contract.
And then WMATA, right, okay, and that's good, but I want to see if I can figure this out. So then WMATA wasn't doing it either, because if they had been, this audit with the findings such as they were, it wouldn't have looked like that, right?
Correct.
Okay. So you weren't watching WMATA, WMATA wasn't watching First Transit, and then we had this situation arise. And then, with the results of this, they weren't made known to the public, to whomever. They were just in your shop, right?
Correct, until I mentioned the audit during our performance oversight hearing.
Right, and then when we asked at the performance oversight hearing, which was how long ago, 6 weeks or something? Which was many months after the audit was conducted, and then you mentioned it, and yet my staff tried to get the details about it, and we were told that it was proprietary information, or it was this or that or the other thing. And we got it from the union. I don't know how they got it, or at least they put it out there. And then you all sent it to me by email. What was it, yesterday? Yesterday. That doesn't inspire confidence. If you were sitting on this information and the details of this information, I think this should have been brought to the committee, brought to the council, brought to the public. We had 40 of 42 buses riding around with these A defects, which means serious safety defects that could render a bus to be put out of service. They were operating like that. Aside from the whole thing about finding them dirty, I would like you to try to explain to me why, it was months and months.
Well, first of all, the audit was, the audit observations were performed in August. The report was finalized in the fall, so I don't have the specific date.
But even still, I found this to be really stunning, all of those safety defects.
Right, and so we thought that the appropriate time to bring up the audit was, as I mentioned,
6 weeks ago in February.
Performance oversight hearing, which I, was very transparent about. The lawyers looked at the document, had some concerns about privacy because people's names were mentioned in the report.
There's this thing, as you know, called redactions.
Those redactions took place. They were a little slow to get that done. So the response that you got was probably overly legalistic. But I've said I mentioned this in the performance oversight hearing. The council, the public, the union, they all have a right to this information. There's nothing to run away from. Get it into the condition so we can make it public. That took a little bit longer than I would have liked, but we're not trying to play hide the
But meanwhile, the
here.
buses were riding all around with these serious defects.
They got fixed.
Well,
meanwhile, they got fixed.
In January, there was an audit by First Transit, right? Itself. They did an audit?
No, we did another audit.
You did another audit. And so that there were improvements in it.
Yes,
and
that's
that's
80% reduction in the findings of defects and a whole host of other programmatic improvements.
And that's a good thing,
more
but
work to be done.
Right.
And I'll disclose that audit when I can get it through the lawyers as well.
Okay, well, being a lawyer myself, I don't want to say negative things about my profession.
I have a positive audit from January that I haven't been able to disclose. So
Remember what Shakespeare said.
I'm trying.
No, we're not. You're a lawyer too, Jack. Be true to your profession at least. So how do we proceed from here in terms of oversight? Is it going to be now left up to you, to DDOT, or to WMATA, or what have you?
It's going to be a partnership between DDOT and WMATA, a closer partnership than we've ever experienced, and I'm confident that that will yield the types of results that were reflected in this audit, which is by no means, the second audit, which is by no means perfect. And
Right, it's 80%, means
there's a lot-
20% not so much.
We'd like to get it all the
Right.
way down to zero.
But that does lead to this question, which we'll just have to leave out there on the table, that Councilmember Evans asked about whether, the middleman of WMATA, which seems to have not really done its oversight of this operation, is something maybe that we should eliminate, because maybe we're wasting our money doing that. But I want to also talk about the union issues, about the labor issues and salaries and so on. The union is saying, as I understand it, that they can sit around and bargain till the cows come home, but really, you, DDOT, I don't mean you, but DDOT, the money, the budget, is such that we lowball this contract amount such that it's inevitable that they'll never be able to catch up in terms of salaries comparable to WMATA drivers. Is that true?
No. So there's no, it kind of works the opposite way. The bids are built from the ground up. It's not like we tell WMATA we have $25 million to spend. Bring in bids that meet that threshold. They perform the procurement and they come back to us and say this is the price you have to pay. So we budget whatever the unit costs are.
I'm sorry, I want to interrupt you, but
process.
so can you explain how it is then that the contract operates in effect, according to the union, in effect as a ceiling on their being able to get salaries comparable with WMATA? How is it that the contract operates in that way? In other words, are we really open-ended so that if there's a negotiation between First Transit and the union, and they bargain very vigorously, and so the First Transit comes back and says, okay, we're going to pay you a salary on par. How is it that we frustrate the ability to actually have that happen?
The DDOT in the way that we run this program and in the way that we budget this program doesn't interfere with a contract negotiation at all. I think the issue is that you have a much smaller bargaining unit that represents the Circulator bus drivers, and the WMATA ATU has 9,000 members, and this bargaining unit has 150, and so the relevant markers is the locally operated transit services in the area. So what the Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Arlington, those wages and benefits tend to be lower than what ATU 689 can achieve as a 9,000
So you're basically saying that the fault for their lower salaries is on their union being less effective than it could be.
I think it is. That's not what it is. I think that they have a legitimate concern about the overhead that the contractor takes from the contract, profit margin, and short-sightedness in not paying people adequately enough and creating retention issues. So I actually think that we, from a public policy perspective, would benefit greatly from having from having more competitive wages, a longer tenure with our.
So all they have to do
group.
is negotiate more vigorously and get them, and everything that you do and WMATA does is irrelevant. They'll be able to get that if they win it at the bargaining table.
That's not what I've said. What I've said repeatedly, I said this, that the first performance oversight hearing, I've said it already today, is that there are certain financial and compensation incentives in terms of retention or the obtainment of a particular credential or something like that, that we as a department can build into our expectations with WMATA that would ultimately lead to higher compensation for certain employees. But I cannot be a party to their contract negotiations. So those are two separate things. So I can go to WMATA and say, look, I'd like to pay $1 per hour bonus for every employee that, you know, hits their second anniversary or something like that, or has a safety record that drives, 100,000 miles without an accident, and that can be factored in. We can give those types of objectives to WMATA from a public management perspective, but I can't sit down at the bargaining table.
No, I understand that, but-
because it would be interfering with
No,
a
yeah, that's fine.
federally protected negotiation.
So you're saying that right now, the union negotiated wage amount is not at all affected by our contract with WMATA and in turn with First Transit?
If they got parity at the negotiating
Yes.
table, we would pay for that. And I
Okay.
understand they're disadvantaged in their negotiation because they're a
Get the
relatively small
pitchforks and
group.
lanterns, people, because apparently if you get to negotiate this at the bargaining table, WMATA's and DDOT in turn is going to pay for it. Councilmember Allen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to follow up just on a couple of quick pieces around that and then move on. So I appreciate my colleagues have asked a lot of questions here. In regards to the second audit, you were talking about, you said that currently it's under review with the attorneys for redaction. So when would that be? What's an estimate of when that would be released? When that type of work can be finished?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to double check. Before I came here today, I was asking them to accelerate that. I think we had asked for comments from First Transit before releasing it, and hopefully I can do it, as soon as possible.
Okay. When was that audit completed?
The observations in the field were done in January.
Okay, so
there's analysis and recommendations.
So you've had it since the end of January?
I don't know exactly when our independent consultant compiled the report and gave it to us as a client.
Okay. And then on the capital line, in response to some of the committee questions, you talked about the department's preparing to purchase 35 new buses to replace 29 vehicles that are reaching the end of the life, 6 vehicles provided by the operating contractor. What do you mean when you say preparing to purchase? Is that is a purchase order that is taking place this fiscal year that's already in a procurement process? Can you help
We're
me
drafting specifications to a solicitation right now.
All right, and
with the intent, I think, of letting and awarding that in fiscal year 17.
okay, so and I'm assuming these aren't buses that are on a shelf, so we're talking the procurement process to build, construct the buses. So
you typically buy a slot on the production line,
Mm-hmm.
so they build buses in large lots, and you, as a smaller operator, have to essentially find a place in the queue on the production line of a vehicle, and so. We're writing a specification right now with hopes of making sure we benefit from the latest and greatest in terms of what's coming off the production line, and hopefully there's other larger properties buying buses that are comparable to to our service needs, so we get the benefits of economies of scale.
But those 35 units they'll be replacing will be taken out of service. 35 new ones will come in, but it's not a reasonable expectation to say those 35 are coming next year. There's a lead time here that will be several years.
There's several years. There's a production schedule, and then the vehicles tend to be released to the owner in the commissioning process in batches. So you wouldn't necessarily get the full order placed all at once, and so that is in relationship to the question that Councilperson Che asked earlier. Having the information about the useful life of the current fleet will help us sort out when the vehicles will be taken offline and replaced, and how many more years we need to get out of some of those early series
But
vehicles.
that purchase is not going to be expanding the fleet. That purchase is replacing units that are in the fleet currently.
Yeah, one-to-one replacement.
Okay. So one of my questions related to that has to do with we're under an obligation when we are looking out in FY18 for a new circulator line to run through Southwest. It was part of what the city negotiated, signed, binding documents with the Southwest community to expand a circulator line from the convention center through Southwest, which will be timed to come online with when DC United Stadium is open. What I don't see in the budget is the capital expenditure to add to the fleet, which I got to believe there's going to have to be new vehicles that come in for that line, or else we're going to see it'll suffer throughout the rest of the lines. I don't see an expenditure that accompanies that commitment. We have supposedly $4.2 million that was supposed to be expended for that purpose. Is there a separate expenditure of this roughly $4 million to add buses to the fleet for this line?
There's nothing reflected in our budget. I think we're working with DC United and the waterfront district to think through the best way to support that development with ground transportation. I think more probably we would be extending the existing line beyond Navy Yard to waterfront, and thinking about kind of route.
Well, those are two different lines. I mean, we've
don't
talked
have
about
enough
that
money
east-west
for another
expansion for years. This is a north-south line from the one that was eliminated several years ago that we put $4.2 million into the budget expressly for that line to be added in, and then we put in expressly money that's then teed up for the FY18 for operating as part of the entire soccer stadium legislation that was passed. But I've yet to see any of that actually executed to then be able to have that line open in 2018. And what I'm seeing with the replacement, which is not expansion of the fleet, but replacement of units, I don't see any of that in line with the legislation that was passed for the soccer stadium.
I can double check, but I mean, based on the current operations, we're not in a position to expand the fleet beyond where we are, and to the extent that we can reduce the number of vehicles that are included in the spare ratio, we can free up additional buses. But to service another line, we don't have the infrastructure to support that.
Well, perhaps then we just have a conversation beyond this hearing, though. But this is a commitment that we had made as a city. This is part of a legislation that we've passed. So it's not like we have an option just to not do it. We've made a commitment to Southwest, to the waterfront, to DC United. This is going to be part of what we do, and it's a part of the law. So we can follow up after this.
The maintenance facility was cut from our budget last year. So that is the defining attribute of our circulator service. We either have a maintenance facility that supports the fleet that we have, or we don't. And we certainly can't contemplate expansion if right now we have a maintenance facility that only supports 50% of our needs. I'd be colossally irresponsible to say that I could deliver on an even bigger circulator fleet when we're working, I think, as best as we can to deal with the current service needs.
Well, I appreciate the position you're in. In my perspective, we made a commitment. We passed a law to say we were going to do this, and so we've got to go find a way to get it done. And we've got a year or two before it has to happen, but I'm not seeing any steps now, and it gives me a lot of concern. But my time's up on this round. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I have similar questions. We were going to extend, and maybe it's already in the works? Because I thought it was, but I want to make sure, based upon the questions that Councilmember Allen was asking you, to extend the circulator on Wisconsin Avenue up to the cathedral. There's no question about that, right? That's going forward, correct?
I don't believe so.
You don't believe so?
Yeah, I thought that in doing analysis of that, the existing metro service was adequate. I can double check with our team, but I'm not. I don't think that we were intending to make that extension anytime soon, given the difficulty we've had with on-time performance with the existing route.
Well, that's kind of a surprise. I'm sure it's going to be a surprise to the people in Glover Park and Cathedral Heights. I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned this previously, and it's about the circulator and the garage that's needed or something like that. I thought we put money into the budget in 16 now, $2 million for the design of a circulator bus garage, but 17 doesn't have any funding for the construction of a bus garage. Why are we not moving forward with that?
Because the budget was reduced to pay for the Metro rail car option last year, and our maintenance facility was cut from the budget. So
that $2 million was redirected to?
We have design money, but we don't have a location. I mean, but until we have a fully funded project and a location, we're not able to support additional expansions of the service.
So when you said it was taken last year, but why is 17? Why does 17 have nothing for that? I thought you just said how urgent it was that we get that.
We had the circulator bus garage in our budget. I think it was, whether it was in the, when I say 16, it was in the 16 to 22 budget. It may have been reflected in an outer year, but it was cut to pay for the Metro rail car option. So it's currently unfunded. Is
there any utility in trying to identify a location now, or should we just sit around and wait?
We're aggressively trying to find a location, but citing a bus garage is a difficult prospect. There's not many people who are, waving with furiously to have us bring buses into their backyard.
Mm-hmm.